Hey everybody, and welcome to this episode of Transit Tangents. My name's Lewis.
And I'm Chris.
And today we're going to be asking an interesting question in this episode. And the question is Brightline spurring public transit investment in Florida? It's been really strange to see Florida become the state that has the fast trains the fastest already. And this is kind of another interesting element here.
Places that you don't think that mass transit's like going to do well.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Florida's not top of mind.
No.
But what we're seeing, it's surprisingly doing very well.
Yeah, and at least the future is looking like it could be doing very well.
The future's looking like it's going to do really well.
Yeah, so this episode we're going to kind of talk about the plans for expanding Orlando's Sunrail. Obviously, right now, Brightline connects Miami to Orlando. Orlando has been like the recent extension here. Miami has some public transit and some rail infrastructure and whatnot. Orlando, not necessarily known for that sort of thing. But interesting.
I disagree, Lewis. Have you been to Disney World?
That's fair, actually.
Public transit at Disney is top notch.
That's fair. We've had that requested as an episode by a couple people, actually. But yeah. So yeah, we're gonna kind of dive into this in this episode. Before we get into the specific Sunrail initiatives, the existing Sunrail system, as well as the what's called the Sunshine Corridor extension. We're going to start by talking about how Brightline has been doing over the last few years, which is increasingly doing really well.
Yeah, absolutely. And Brightline's such a fascinating topic. If you talk to anybody in the transit sphere who's paying attention, even people who really aren't paying attention, they've heard of Brightline. And by and large, I think most people's opinions are pretty positive of Brightline. You run into people occasionally who don't really support the idea of private business, setting out these rails and setting out these projects. We'll kind of get into that a little bit.
Right.
But pretty much everybody has heard of Brightline at this point.
Totally. And now they have 15 trains per day in each direction, which is basically hourly service throughout the day. In the morning, it's a little bit more frequent than that even, and then it kind of tapers off at the end of the day. Again, full route right now goes from downtown Miami to the Orlando airport. So there's no like downtown Orlando stop or anything. But right now we're running to the airport. There are plans to extend this to Tampa, which we'll talk a little bit about later. Again, really frequent service. And what's surprising is we consistently hear about like, Brightline's expensive, and that's kind of one of the negatives of having this more like private business running this, which I think there are real concerns there that could be an issue.
Well, private business can charge whatever they want. I mean, look at airlines. Airlines can kind of charge whatever they want when they know that a seat is in demand.
Right.
And that's the fear, I think, with Brightline is like you have this really great public good, and they're going to charge $1,000 for a ticket.
Right.
And to be fair, when they first opened, tickets were pretty expensive.
Right.
It was comparable to what you would pay for a flight, maybe slightly more in certain days, but it was comparable to a flight. But today, that's different.
Yeah. So I just for a test to see, I looked for tomorrow, and tomorrow there were probably 10 of the 15 routes throughout the day, not routes, scheduled times throughout the day.
Tomorrow being mid-February, depending on when this episode comes out.
Right, yes. Tickets were about $44. Some of them were as low as $39, and these are for kind of similar to an airline. They have different tiers, right? So these are for the tickets that are non-refundable. You can't change them. If you wanted to upgrade it to an economy ticket that you can change, it was more like $60 or $65, which still feels very reasonable to go from Miami all the way to Orlando. And then on top of that, the first class tickets were around $120, which for a first class ticket feels, again, pretty on par with what it should be.
I'm curious because I'm doing the math in my head. Like, you can probably get a pretty cheap airline flight from Miami to Orlando, like a Spirit or a Frontier or something, for comparable price, like $60, maybe less. But then you have to pay for the bags.
Right.
And you have to go through all the process of that airport involves.
Exactly, yeah. At some point, we'll do a very specific episode kind of just focusing on the Brightline model, kind of comparing what they're doing in Florida to what they're planning to do out in between LA and Las Vegas, which is currently under construction. It's not necessarily the point of this, but we're going to share a couple stats here just to give folks an idea of how many people are riding it, because this directly will influence the kind of expansion plans for the Orlando Sunrail that we're talking about when you have all of a sudden all these people landing in Orlando with no car. Do they have to rent a car, or can we get them to the rest of their destinations continuing to use transit?
So, if we're talking about Brightline stats, like I said, this project, it looks like it's going really well. It's only seemingly growing in the future. In 2024, Brightline saw about 2.7 million riders, which is a lot.
It is a lot, yeah. Roughly between 200 to 250,000 a month.
Yeah, and if we compare those to some of the Amtrak routes that we see, I mean, it's significant compared to a lot of the Amtrak routes that we see too.
Absolutely, and again, this is in Florida.
Yeah.
This is not the Northeast Corridor. This is not like a super, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
This is Florida.
Yeah. And we're seeing this growth trajectory, which is looking really good. In 2019, it was 885,000 passengers. Again, we're kind of getting close to the COVID years, so some of this is going to be depressed to some extent. But by 2022, we got to 1.2 million. 2023, we're at 2 million, and now here we are sitting at about 2.7. So.
Right.
Really impressive growth in ridership.
And with all of the ridership too, Brightline initially started with 4 passenger cars on each of their train sets. At that level, they were selling out a ton.
Sorry, the train sets. I'm just picturing like little model trains.
That's like the industry jargon, I think. You call it a train set. But so they have since added a 5th car to all of their train sets to try to offset some of that. And then in October of this year, in their kind of quarterly update call, they have since ordered additional train sets so that additional passenger cars so that each of the trains will have up to 7 passenger cars on them, which is pretty significant. Just to give you an idea of how many people fit in each one, when they were doing 4 passenger cars, each train could carry about 240 people, which is already a pretty significant amount, especially when they were selling it out. When they bumped it up to 5, that bumps it to about 306 people. And then I'm doing a little bit of assumptions here because some of the cars will be first-class cars versus economy, and I'm imagining there are less seats in the first-class cars. But estimating to be around 430 people per train once they get this up to the full 7 cars per train.
Yeah, it's a lot of people you're able to move in one go. A good comparison to that is a commercial airliner like a 737 maxes out around 200 people,
right.
200 passengers. So it is a way more efficient way to move large amounts of people. And I think that's a good point to try to segue back into. The point of this episode is, okay, we are moving so many people between Miami and Orlando. What happens when they get to Orlando?
Right.
And that is a question you hear, or a statement you hear all the time about connecting cities by train is, well, if the cities don't have public transit, then how are people going to get around? What's the point of the train?
Right.
Which I don't like that argument. But I think what we're seeing in Orlando is a good answer to that argument.
Totally. And to this end, too, I mean, people don't necessarily want to get in a car. There was one really other interesting tidbit that came out of this October call with Brightline. They did a survey of their frequent riders. There's a large group of folks who are riding Brightline for work on a regular basis. And according to Brightline, 66% of long-haul survey responders stated that Brightline has changed their habit from mostly driving to mostly taking the train.
Yeah.
Which is amazing. So if these folks are changing their habits there, instead of landing in Orlando and getting an Uber or renting a car at the Orlando airport where they're ending up, if they could just transfer onto another train to get them to their final destination, these people very likely would want to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be a much more comfortable experience. If the train is taking a comparable amount of time, you can get up, you can get a snack, the seats are bigger, you can watch a movie, you can work on the way. Like, it just makes way more sense than taking a private car or a plane in that case.
Totally.
Yeah.
So that brings us finally to Sunrail here.
Yes.
So right now, Orlando operates a commuter train that runs 61 miles, which is pretty
also
impressive.
Wild.
In the north, it presently ends in DeLand. Sorry if I'm saying these wrong.
DeLand.
And in the south, it ends in Kissimmee and Poinciana. I don't even know if it's Kissimmee, is it?
Kissimmee.
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 I don't know. All the Florida folks
I don't know
Poinciana.
I don't know Poinciana, but I know
Yeah.
Kissimmee.
Yeah.
Kissimmee.
There you go. Beep. Yeah, so it's this extremely long north-south route, hitting both of those destinations on the far ends with downtown Orlando in the middle. It doesn't see crazy ridership. I mean, this isn't going through the most dense areas in general.
I would not call this region of Florida very dense. You have a couple of like small town centers. Downtown Orlando has some stuff going on, but for the most part, it is the land of suburbia.
Right. Even despite that, last year in 2024, this existing Sunrail route saw 1.2 million riders, which, again, not great, but it's also not, it's a good place to start, especially considering that this isn't connecting a lot of major destinations in the Orlando area. In addition to Sunrail, Orlando operates a whole variety of bus routes, ranging from kind of like BRT light routes to just normal local buses. Just for some context on ridership in Orlando, we're seeing almost 20 million riders on their bus system throughout 2024. It is almost a 7% increase from the year before, so it is trending in the right direction, which we obviously love to see.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing to also note about Sunrail, we mentioned that it is a commuter line that runs these 61, 62 miles through this region, and it gets very close to the airport, but it doesn't actually make the connection to the airport, which is something very frustrating in a lot of cities in the US, is that there's no rail connection to airports, unlike cities in Europe.
Right.
However, you do have Brightline going into the Orlando airport, and then you have a Sunrail station that's maybe a couple miles away from the airport. Not too bad, but there is a bus, the Lynx bus, that can connect you from the terminal to that station.
Right, and there's one bus that takes you right to the station. It seems like it runs about every half an hour or so. There's another bus that kind of gets you close. It's really not perfect, though. This isn't even like a direct bus to the Sunrail. It's just a local bus that makes stops along the way.
I do like how the advertisement for this, though, is a hassle-free experience connecting you to Sunrail, but you have to get on a bus and you have to download a Lynx app and a Sunrail app and find the station and walk. It's a lot.
I think it requires a shuttle bus from like your airport terminal to get you to the bus station.
It is not a hassle-free experience.
Right. However, the good news here is that the plan for the extension to Sunrail is to actually make it a hassle-free experience. So enter the Sunshine Corridor. Lots of use of the word sun here.
We need like a good, bright sound as this comes on.
The Sunshine Corridor is kind of we're going to call it like a rough outline right now. The exact alignments here are not fully agreed upon. There have been lots of different potential alignments floated for a long time now. This project has been floated a decade ago at one point. It's very much in, we'll kind of get into the exact stages in a little bit here, but it would essentially take you from the Orlando airport. It would go west towards the Sunrail, eventually meet up with the Sunrail corridor for a bit, and have what seems like would need to be like a new transfer station with the Sunrail. There's a lot of potential to do some transit-oriented development and stuff like that in an area like that. And then this new line would continue to veer off the Sunrail corridor and head further west towards the Orlando Convention Center, as well as potential stops near Universal Studios as well as Disney Springs. So really connecting the airport to the Sunrail corridor, which makes it so you could get up to downtown Orlando, as well as to kind of major tourist, but also employment destinations in the area.
I was just thinking that too. It's great for employees in the Orlando area if it's connecting to some of the residential areas. But the biggest thing in Orlando, it is the tourist industry.
Right.
I mean, Orlando's the most visited city in the United States, I think, as far as domestic tourists go, for all of the parks. And if there is any city that has a good use case for a mass transit system and being able to efficiently move these people around, it is Orlando. So having the option to land at the airport and then take a train to Universal or to Disney Springs and then get in your hotel there, that's a viable option I think many people would take.
Absolutely. And hearing, right now the Orlando mayor is very much in support of this, and hearing him as well as other county officials and whatnot in the county that Orlando is in, as well as some of the other surrounding counties, talk about the potential for multimodal transport at the airport, seamless connections from Brightline onto the Sunrail, from folks coming in from the airport, to building better, potentially even bus infrastructure in the area. It's just like, again, I just back to the beginning, like, this isn't Florida.
Yeah.
We'll jump right back into the episode in just a second, but first, if you haven't liked this video or left a comment, please do so. It helps us out quite a bit. And we also have some exciting news.
Yeah, if you want to support the show, we have swag, we have merchandise. Go check out our store where you can get hats, t-shirts, hoodies, A bunch of other things coming, new designs for that, all going to be coming up in the next few weeks.
Lastly, if you want to support the show directly and get access to early episodes, you can do so on Patreon. But without further ado, let's jump right back into the episode. And it's some positive news here too. So the next kind of step to make this happen is a feasibility study. You do the feasibility study first, and then you use the feasibility study to kind of pitch for federal funds. Now, federal funds could be an issue. We'll kind of talk about federal funds in a second here, but a feasibility study for this right now they're saying is only going to cost $6 million. So far, to the state of Florida's credit, they're saying we'll cover the first $2 million. Florida DOT is saying, okay, we'll do $6 million. The $2 million. City of Orlando has said they'll chip in $500,000, and then Seminole County has said that they will chip in an additional $500,000. Okay. So we're currently sitting at $3 of the $6 million for the feasibility study already set up. Some of this has literally happened in the last couple days, so this is currently in motion. It sounds like they're not worried about raising the $6 million. That it's just a matter of having the county commissioners meetings and that sort of thing to get them to vote on it. It also sounds like Brightline may chip in because
I was just thinking if Brightline would chip in, because it's good for them too.
It's good for them too for a couple of reasons. It's good for them because it can help deliver people to their train. But number two, this Sunshine Corridor is actually the most likely alignment that Brightline will take in the beginning of their Tampa expansion. So the Brightline trains would actually run along the same right of way for about 12 miles until Brightline then needs to just get on its own track following the highway to Tampa.
Yeah, I think it's a good synchronicity. What would you say?
They're very harmonious projects.
Exactly, it would be a good partnership.
Good synergies
for them. Good synergy.
Yes,
there we go.
Yeah, that was probably the word you read.
Synergy.
Synchronicity. But yeah, I mean, overall, this is a ambitious project. It's not going to happen overnight here. No. This is still early stages, but I mean, it's really optimistic to see stuff like this happening in a state like Florida. I also think that with this extension, you're also going to see positive synergies. Again, now I can't stop using the word, but with the rest of Orlando's public transit. So my guess is this would increase ridership on the existing north-south Sunrail line. And this also could increase ridership on buses, especially if you have more of a focus on feeder buses feeding into the rail stations, increasing rail frequencies and the like. It'd be really great for the area.
Yeah, I think it's something that we should stay tuned to. But it is something that will be in development. There's no exact alignments yet for how this is going to go. We just have sort of general destinations that the city wants to connect.
Yeah, so while the alignment doesn't have a specific route yet, it's pretty interesting when you look at it just from satellite view. There is like a weird assortment of freight lines that kind of run through this area, as well as a couple wider roads with some right-of-way that could probably be tweaked to sneak this rail line in. There's some industrial areas before you get to the park areas. So they could get pretty creative and not need to go spending tons and tons of money to put this rail line through. It's not like it's through like a single-family neighborhood or something like that.
I agree. And Florida's not shy about building highways, especially in the Orlando area, because if you've ever been to Orlando, it is just a huge highway network to get around. There's a lot of right-of-way to use.
Totally. As far as the federal money goes, too, I think this is an interesting situation, right? Because we now have a Trump administration. The Trump administration is not super fans of transit. However, I think that there are a couple things going for this project that maybe they will actually get federal grant money. As we mentioned, a lot of transit advocates' criticisms of Brightline are that it is a private company. They obviously do also receive federal funding. They've been receiving federal funding in the project for Brightline West. They have received some for the project in Florida as well. Because this alignment is going to be sharing the Brightline alignment, I think that there's a really strong chance that the Trump administration looks at this and says, look, private industry is building this rail line. Like, we should invest in this sort of thing to make sure that like private rail companies can be a thing. Look at how efficient they're doing it, blah, blah, blah. This is not how I feel entirely about this, but I'm just trying to put my brain there. And
Republican governments, state governments in general, but especially Republican governments, love P3s. So any type of private-public partnership, because it does take some of the burden off of the public budgets,
Yeah.
and it allows market forces to dictate how things work. And,
And
there's pros and cons to that.
Yeah, and I would say they specifically like ones that like have a proven track record.
Yeah.
Like it'd be one thing if Brightline was super over budget, delayed, blah 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 blah, but like they have and sure, I'm sure that they were not exactly on their schedules and everything and whatnot, but for the most part, I think we can agree that like Brightline was a pretty well managed
I think so.
project as far as putting it together, and it is currently running really great service. It's overwhelmingly popular. So I think when they look at that, I think that the Trump administration is not going to be that hesitant to chip in some dollars for this. I could be wrong, but yeah.
I think one thing too, reading through some of the directives from the DOT currently, since our new secretary Duffy is in there.
Mm-hmm.
Going to miss Pete.
R.I.P.
Yeah.
R.I.P.
R.I.P. But one of the directives is to focus on allocating transit funding or transportation budget funding in general to places.
High birth rates.
I wasn't going to say high birth rates. That is one directive. Focus on places with high fertility rates. It's weird. But to focus on projects that can have a sense of positive economic impact. So we have to start looking at transit projects at what is the economic benefit going to be with this project being completed, and less about, hey, we're trying to connect these communities.
Right.
Because connecting communities is not the language they want to hear. They want to hear things in dollar amounts. So maybe there's a sort of conversation shift that has to happen around these projects.
And we do want to do a more in-depth episode kind of about the transit policy and the new transportation secretary. We're holding off a little bit right now just because everything is changing so quickly. But as we kind of learn more, stay tuned for that sort of thing. And if there's specific things you want to hear or want us to dig into on that, definitely let us know in the comments.
Yeah, but I think what any transit advocate needs to be focused on now is we need to support Amtrak, try to preserve what we can of Amtrak. But we also have to be open to these ideas of private companies also creating these projects.
Right. It's either that or just sit on our hands and wait. And I'd love to see the Trump administration throw money at Amtrak and say expand, make it bigger, but it ain't gonna happen.
No.
there's no way it's gonna happen. So yeah, like to your point, like let's preserve what we have with Amtrak and let's see if doing more things like Brightline, or if Brightline wants to expand into more cities, like I think we really need to get behind it, because otherwise we're not getting more rail right now.
Yeah, agreed. So like we said, stay tuned to this, Florida plan that is coming out. There's a lot of really exciting things coming from this state. Also, share with us in the comments what you think about the P3s, the private-public partnerships, or what you think about Brightline and how it can spur this development of public transit.
If you're not following us on social media, please do. We've got accounts on Blue Sky, which is a new one. We're on Instagram. We're on X. We're on TikTok. I haven't been posting much there. I'm sorry. Yeah. But we'd love to see you on our social media. We respond to messages on most of those places as well.
Please like and subscribe to this video.
Yes.
Also, if you want to support us further, we have our Patreon where we try to release episodes early, and we also add some additional content there as well.
Totally. You can also check out our brand new merch store, and you can get some fun Transit Tangents shirts. We've got socks. I don't have any of them yet. I want to order a pair, actually. Hats, all sorts of things. For those of you who have already ordered, thank you so much. But with all of that being said, thank you all so much for watching, and enjoy the rest of your Transit Tangents Tuesday.
I'm saving that dough. Public transit where it's at. Watch me